Contrary to popular belief, our first president didn't really have teeth made out of wood. George Washington's teeth were actually made out of gold, ivory, lead, and human and animal teeth. Prior to becoming the vice president to George Washington and the second president of the United States, John Adams was a prominent lawyer from Massachusetts. He first gained public attention for defending the British soldiers who were involved in the Boston Massacre. Thomas Jefferson and his predecessor, John Adams, both died on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence was adopted. On his deathbed, John Adams famously exclaimed, "Thomas Jefferson survives," not knowing that Jefferson had passed away hours earlier. He probably didn't brag about this too often, but James Madison was, and still is, the smallest president in United States history. He stood at 5 feet 4 inches and weighed just over 100 pounds. James Monroe was the first president to run effectively unopposed. 232 electoral votes were cast, with Monroe winning 231 of them. Only one bitter elector from New Hampshire kept Monroe from the clean sweep. Rather than retiring after his presidency, John Quincy Adams would win election to the House of Representatives, where he would serve until his death in 1848. To this day, he remains the only former president to be elected to the chamber. Andrew Jackson loved to duel. It's reported that he took part in up to 100 duels in his lifetime, one of which resulted in the death of his opponent. That would make him the only United States president to have killed a man that we know of. Martin Van Buren was the first president to be born as a United States citizen, as all previous presidents were born prior to the country's independence. He was born in Kinderhook, New York, just 6 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed. Not exactly the legacy that he dreamt of leaving behind, William Henry Harrison is known for serving the shortest tenure in presidential history. He died just 32 days into his term after a common cold developed into pneumonia. If there was one thing that John Tyler was great at, it was making babies. John had 15 children who ended up giving him 50 total grandchildren. One of his grandchildren, Harrison Tyler, is still alive as of this recording in November 2024. James K. Polk decided not to run for re-election in 1848, and he would end up dying from cholera just 3 months after he left office. While celebrating the 4th of July in 1850, Zachary Taylor contracted food poisoning that would ultimately claim his life 5 days later. Millard Fillmore got his name from both parents. Obviously, his last name came from his father, but his first name was actually his mother's maiden name. Look, I get that being the president is a stressful job, but most would probably agree that the president should have a clear mind while in office. That wasn't the case for Franklin Pierce, however. It was often reported that Pierce was an alcoholic, and this was used against him heavily in the 1853 election. James Buchanan was the only bachelor president in history. He was once engaged, but the engagement was broken off for unknown reasons. I bet the White House was quite the bachelor pad. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, Abraham Lincoln was the tallest president in history. President Andrew Johnson did not attend school. He grew up in a poor family and was mostly self-educated. Ulysses wasn't his real first name. His full name was Hiram Ulysses Grant, but he was stuck with Ulysses due to a mistake on his application to West Point. Rutherford B. Hayes was the first president to have a telephone and a typewriter installed in the White House. James Garfield had the second shortest tenure as president, as he would lose his life just 199 days into his term. Similar to how many modern presidents spend free time on the golf course, Chester A. Arthur spent nearly all of his free time fishing. Grover Cleveland was the 22nd and 24th president, making him the first to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. Benjamin Harrison was the last president to have a beard while in office. William McKinley was a school teacher in Ohio before the breakout of the Civil War. When he was a child, Theodore Roosevelt had asthma. He would exercise to help manage it because the medicine did not seem to help. William Howard Taft was the fattest president we've ever had. At his largest, he weighed around 330 pounds. Woodrow Wilson is the only president that is currently buried in Washington, D.C. Warren G. Harding was the first president to broadcast a speech over the radio. With a birth date of July 4th, 1872, Calvin Coolidge was the first president to be born on Independence Day. The largest dam in the United States is named after the 31st president, Herbert Hoover. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the only president to serve more than 2 terms. After his death and due to his lengthy presidency, the 22nd Amendment was introduced to limit terms of presidents. The S in Harry S. Truman doesn't actually stand for anything. It's just S. Dwight D. Eisenhower was the first president to be broadcast on color television. At the time of John F. Kennedy's election, he was 43 years old, making him the youngest president in history. Before entering politics, Lyndon B. Johnson worked as a teacher, and to make ends meet, He also worked as the school janitor. Despite the whole Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon was actually a very popular president. In the 1972 election, Nixon received 520 electoral votes, or almost 97% of the votes. Due to the aftermath of Watergate, Ford became the first and only president to take office without winning a general election for president or vice president. Jimmy Carter is the longest-lived president in history. He is still alive as of this recording at 100 years old. While appearing in a film called Bedtime for Bonzo, Ronald Reagan was almost suffocated when his chimpanzee castmate pulled too hard on his tie. George H.W. Bush played baseball for Yale in college. Bill Clinton's cat named Socks is one of the most famous presidential pets. George W. Bush was a part owner of the Texas Rangers. He sold his stake just before becoming president. Barack Obama spent parts of his childhood in Indonesia and was once fluent in Indonesian. Donald Trump is the wealthiest president in history by quite a large margin. Joe Biden ran for president many times. He first ran in 1988 and then again in 2008 against Barack Obama. Know any other weird facts about presidents? If so, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Also, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.